Hey guys, Don here again with another knife video. So this video is going to be about different lock types for folding pocket knives. I'm not going to cover every single lock out there, but I'll cover I think a pretty fair amount of the probably most common ones that you'll run into, especially if you're new to collecting knives or buying knives, pocket knives. I'm not going to talk about, which one's the strongest, which one's the best. There's plenty of videos out there like torture tests, that kind of stuff. Quite honestly, if you spend a decent amount on a good knife, meaning more than like your $5 or $10 or $15 gas station knife, if you invest in a good pocket knife, any of these locks are probably going to do you just fine, as long as you're not, abusing your pocket knife. So use it for what it's intended. If you need a fixed blade for the job, then you need a fixed blade. If you need something else, like a small hatchet, don't use your folding knife for a task that's intended for something like a hatchet. As long as you're using your knife for EDC tasks, any of these lock types will probably be good. It's just dependent on what your preferences are. I'm also going to talk about what my preference is out of all of these. So let's get started. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a lock back. Okay, this is my Pohl Force Alpha 3, and it's got a lock back design. So the way a lock back works is this part of the spine here, the locking mechanism is on a little leaf spring. And basically in this case, I'm going to, with this knife, that's the lock is actually the detent that holds this blade in place as well, keeps it from shaking out. And so as the blade rotates, there's the tang, it's rounded there, it rotates around, and we got this little cutout in that tang, and that is where the lock is going to engage. Once the blade is all the way rotated open, lock goes in, and now we've got a nice secure lock on that knife. Lockbacks are pretty strong. Some say that they are safer because most of the time, almost all the time, they force you to use two hands to kind of disengage and close the blade, making sure that you don't accidentally have your fingers in the path of the blade when you are closing the knife. Can you close this one-handed? Well, this is a really big knife, number one, so it's very difficult. It's very stiff. With a lockback, I guess you could push down on this side. And see, this is really stiff. If there's enough, if there's not too much friction on the washers, if the knife can drop down, then you could potentially be able to close it one-handed more easily. This one, I can't close this one one-handed. So that's the lockback. An improvement over the lockback would be Cold Steel's Triad Lock, Demko design. Andrew Demko, he's a knife maker, knife designer, and worked with Cold Steel to invent the Triad Lock. So the Triad Lock takes the lockback concept. So here again is our spring-loaded locking mechanism back here. But instead of engaging just on the tang, the Triad Lock adds this stop pin. Let me disengage that a little bit so you can see that a little better. So that stop pin right in there makes it so you're not only engaging the tang, but now you got that stop pin in between as well for the blade to rest on. That increases the strength of the lock design. Triad Lock is pretty popular for being a very strong lock. If you look up, Triad Lock, lock strength tests, stuff like that, you'll find tons and tons of videos where they do like all these rigorous tests about like putting weights on it, spine whacking it, and making sure the lock doesn't disengage. And again, that's all fine and dandy, but if you're sitting around every day like whacking the spine of your knife and abusing it, for most of us, you're probably not going to be doing that. However, it does show the strength of that Triad Lock. So again, to disengage this, I'm just going to press down right here, kind of like with the lockback, and similarly, just close it. And this is a one-hand opening. To close it, the blade drops, and then I could turn like this if I wanted to, I guess, to close it one hand. Again, And it's basically, the Triad Lock is basically an evolution, or maybe you could look at it as an improvement over the traditional lockback. Next one is the button lock. So on my Hogue here, okay, all right, this is the X5. The button lock mechanism is right here, okay. So the way the button lock works is literally you have a button, and right now with the knife stowed away in its closed position, the knife is keeping that button, the little spring in there, keeping this side of the button pressed down. And then once we deploy the knife, okay, so if I can get a close-up here, so as I push the button plunger, you can see how that kind of moves up and down. So when the knife is stowed, it holds it in place like this, and when the knife is deployed, okay, so this pops into place, trying to get a good angle there, and it stops the knife from moving forward, and it stops the knife from closing. If I push on this button, of course, the knife blade will swing down like that. Okay. This knife does have a safety. Okay, this is the safety right here. So this safety allows me to engage that, and let me kind of get an angle so you can see in there. So with that safety engaged, I can no longer push the button down, and if I can't push the button down by accident, I can't accidentally disengage it like this and allow the blade to swing down and fail on me. So that's a nice feature with this button lock design. Again, I'll just show you when I press the button how easily it just falls and disengages, and I can push it all the way in. So that's a button lock. Nice thing about the button lock, pretty much, you know, you can operate it with one hand, opening it and closing it, and that's one of the things I like with my knives, my pocket knives. I like to be able to operate them with one hand. Next one is going to be the Benchmade, the Axis lock. Now, Benchmade for a while had the patent on this, and so they had the Axis lock in general. A lot of companies are now doing this, and the general term for it would be like a crossbar type lock. Something similar, Spyderco has a ball bearing lock that works in a kind of similar fashion, but instead of a bar, they use a ball. There still is a spring. So this is, you know, one-handed operation. You can pull back with both fingers, with a thumb and your index finger on each side, and pull back, and then the blade disengages. Okay, very fluid, very nice. Keeps your fingers out of the path of the blade when you're closing that knife. The Axis lock relies on two, and I can't really show it to you here because I'd have to take the knife down to probably really show it to you, but basically there's springs, they're called omega springs, that are wrapped around each side of this crossbar, and those springs make the bar, you know, work, basically. So they provide resistance. So a couple of ways to open this. You know, you can open it really easily and soft like that. You can flick it open, of course. If you pull back on that Axis lock, you can basically swing that blade open. Okay, this is Benchmade's Crooked River. This is the custom design that I made on their website. Crossbar, basically, once it engages, okay, once that Axis lock or crossbar engages, basically, so here's the blade tang, right? Let me get that in focus, hopefully. That blade tang comes up, and that Axis lock or the crossbar basically is resting on top of the blade in there to keep the blade from swinging forward and closing. All right, so there's the Axis lock. Strong locking mechanism. Again, relies on two omega springs. I have heard of read about Omega spring failure. Honestly, Benchmade sells so many of their knives. I think that's definitely probably the exception and not the norm. I mean, think about it. Almost all their knives are axis locks. If their Omega springs were that bad and failing that often, they probably wouldn't be selling that many of them. They probably wouldn't be in business the way they are. So, can it happen? Absolutely. I don't think, my opinion is it's probably the exception and not the norm. All right. Next, we have the compression lock, exclusive to Spyderco, I believe. So Paramilitary 2 has it. And so the compression lock, some people call it an inverted liner lock. Somewhat accurate, I guess, because it is integrated as part of that liner, or that nested liner, but it's also, so the way this works, let's see, you got that little cutout in there, in that blade, on the blade tang, okay, right in there, and once the blade closes, it butts up against the stop pin, and then this compression lock is also there. So what have we got that you can't really see too well on the camera here? You've got a blade, the blade tang going up against that stop pin, and then the compression lock engaging. And so basically you got blade, stop pin, and then compression lock. Some people describe it like a sideways triad lock. That's a good way to kind of explain it, with that extra stability with that stop pin being there to take a little bit of the load off. Very stable lock. Again, nice thing about this is when you're closing the knife, it keeps your fingers out of the path of the blade. Okay. So, single hand operation, I like it. It's fun to play with, very fidgety, fidget friendly. Okay. Compression lock. Next, getting towards the end here. Probably one of the most common locks that you'll run into with many knives is the Walker liner lock. So I got two knives here. One is the Spyderco Military. The other one is a Boker Gemini. So Military, obviously the more expensive knife of the two. Liner locks, you got to be careful with them. That's why I said, if you invest in a good knife, they're going to do their liner locks well, and you probably won't have to worry about lock failure unless, again, you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing with that knife. You'll notice the Spyderco, maybe you can notice, the liner on the Spyderco is going to be thicker, of course, than the one for the Boker here. I mean, it's a more expensive knife. It's also a bigger blade, and also a slightly thicker blade stock. But so the way the liner lock works is basically it's part of the liner. It's bent on tension, and basically you can use your thumb to move that lock over, and then make sure you get your finger out of the path of the blade and close it. Sometimes when I close liner locks and frame locks, which we'll get to next, I'll turn the blade this way to make sure that gravity doesn't just throw the blade down a little too soon before I can move my thumb out of the way. So that's a liner lock. Again, different knives, different size knives, different size blade stocks will have, some may have thicker liners than others. The main thing is, like I said, most knives, if you spend a decent amount on a good knife, and they'll do a good liner. Right here we can see it butted up on the tang there, and we've got about what we call 50% engagement or so, about halfway to the liner. These are halfway on the tang. So these tangs, you want a decent amount of engagement and lock up, because as you use the knife, this tang is cut slanted, so as you use the knife, that liner is going to go further and further this way. And so you don't want it like almost all the way over. In this case, I've still got, it's actually not quite 50%, so plenty of time for that to wear in. It's a good lock too. Single hand open and close as well, or you could, of course, be safer, disengage the lock and use two hands. And now we get to the frame lock. So the frame lock is basically an improvement over the liner lock. So the frame lock utilizes, instead of a thin liner, we're using the entire frame of one side of the knife to engage in the lockup. So this is my Sebenza 21, and you know, this was Chris Reeve, I believe, is credited to inventing this. It was Reeve Integral Lock was the original name, but it's basically one side of the knife, that slab, that titanium slab on this side, being cut, and then this being tensioned and in, so that basically it butts up against the tang of the blade and keeps it from closing. Okay, so that's a frame lock. Now, the frame locks that I own, you invest in a good frame lock, they're very steady, okay, they're solid. Chris Reeve Sebenza is known for the tight tolerances that you can use. You can tighten the pivot all the way down without using Loctite. Because of the pivot bushing, you can tighten this all the way down, and because of the tolerances, it's what makes this so solid. There is no side-to-side or up and down blade play. Okay, another one of my favorite knives that regularly makes it into my pocket for my rotation is my Strider SMF. Okay, this is my 2019 version. Okay, Strider, same thing. We've got that titanium side. This side is aluminum on this model, and again with that frame lock, it is, I've got probably, I'm engaged at about maybe 40%, 30 to 40%. Still plenty of room to go. And Strider and also Hinderer actually achieve stability, solid feel, no play, differently a little bit from Chris Reeve. So you can't, this is tension dependent. If I tighten down on the pivot more, it's going to be harder to open and close, but the knife may be more stable. However, they can give up a little bit of the tolerances because of the external stop pins. The external stop pins on this frame lock knife basically give it more rigidity, because now not only do you have the lock butting up against the tang of the blade, you got these two external stop pins butting up directly against both sides of the frame, which gives it much better, very nice and rigid lateral stability. Okay, so out of all these locks, which are my favorite? Probably I would say the frame lock is my favorite. Basically for its simplicity. My thing is, the simpler the better, and particularly with my Sebenza and with my Strider, you're looking at a minimal number of parts to these knives. The Sebenza in particular, I can take this apart with one tool, okay? And then there's no little springs to worry about. The frame lock is simple. Simple is good, in my opinion. The Strider, similarly, not too many parts. I require 3 tools, you know, a mini Torx, a chain ring bolt tool for a bike chain, as well as a hex driver as well, to be able to take the Strider apart. But once it's taken apart for cleaning, that kind of thing, maintenance, it's a minimal number of parts, easy to put back together. The lock, you know, is very simple to operate and manipulate with one hand, and it's probably stronger than just a plain liner lock. So my favorite, in my opinion, would be the frame lock. Your opinion may differ. You may like, you know, a lot of people love the axis lock or similar, a crossbar lock from Benchmade or other manufacturers. That's just my opinion, why I like the frame lock. So I guess that's about it. If you guys like this kind of stuff, throw me a like, subscribe. You know, want me to talk about other things about knives or anything else, drop me a comment or something. Keep it friendly. and I guess I'll talk to you guys later.